If you go to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, right where the Marshall Islands are, and you zoom all the way in to this little tiny island in the middle of nowhere, you can see this weird shipwreck on the west coast of this island. This island's called Jemo Island, and it's part of the country of the Marshall Islands, and it's really close to the Likiep atoll. One of you guys commented about this unknown shipwreck here, and I wanted to see if I could take a crack at finding out what this ship was and some of the backstory of it. The first thing I did is I looked around Jemo Island on Google Maps to see if there was any other structures on this place. And just from the surface, it doesn't appear that there's any houses or any buildings here, just the shoreline with this boat on the side. If I measure it, it measures about 57 meters long and about 12 meters wide. So that might give us some hints later, but we'll come back to that. Now, when I checked on Wikipedia, I thought there would be a simple answer on there, and it gives a little bit of backstory on this island, but I was more interested in this last line. There is also a shipwreck of unknown origin on the west side of the island, and gives no more information about that, and it has no references about that ship also. So we're gonna have to do our own digging to find this out. Next, I tried Apple Maps because sometimes it shows a clear resolution zoomed in on these remote places than Google Maps, and you can actually see the shoreline a lot better. It appears to be pretty much the same image, and I can zoom in real close to the ship, but there's really nothing there. It does appear that it's embedded pretty decently into the sand, but there's still no obvious buildings on this place. The next thing I did is simply search Jemo Island online, and I found this website, infomarshallislands.com, that literally has a bunch of pictures and some info about Jemo Island. Let's look through some of them. So it looks like these photos are from Nicky DeBrum, who is the mayor of Likiep, which is that atoll that's slightly southwest of this island. And it looks like in July of 2018, he and a few others took a trip to Jemo Island and kind of documented what they saw. Let's look at some of these pictures. Here's that first picture real close of the ship, and it looks like it's pretty old and pretty torn down. The caption simply says, "The wreck of the Marshall Islander that sits rotting on Jemo Island." Photo, Nicky DeBrum. The next photo shows the ship a little better, and you can see kind of how the ship is embedded into the sand here. The caption simply says, "Sand fills the hold of the Marshall Islander at Jemo Island." Looking through the other pics, this place looks pretty cool. It's like your stereotypical tropical remote island. And it looks like this guy's making a protective basket for a coconut crab, which is super cool. Here's a bird that's there. Looks like the bird was tangled in a line, sadly, but this guy helped out the bird and got him free. And this is what the inside of the island looks like. There also appears to be an overturned boat on the shores of Jemo Island. And I couldn't clearly see this from Google Maps, and I tried looking for it, but there's really not much information on this either. Part of the shoreline of Jemo Island is this exposed reef, and part of it is sandy like this. Anyways, let's get back to the shipwreck. So it doesn't give us a lot of info, but it does say it's called the Marshall Islander, so we're gonna have to search that up. Also in the description, it says there are also some shots of the Marshall Islander, which sadly ran up onto the reef at Jemo. Apparently it was no fault of the captain. And that's simply all the information on this. I then tried to learn a little more about Jemo Island to see maybe someone lives there or anything, but apparently no one has lived here, and it's been unpopulated for pretty much as long as people have been keeping track. And I found a list of ships visiting Jemo Island until 1885, and there was only 3 of them, well, actually 2 of them. Looks like the San Pedro, who was one of the first Europeans to come by the Marshall Islands, found this place in 1565. And then in 1799, looks like Charles Bishop, a fur trader, came by in the Nautilus. I kept searching the Marshall Islander boat on a bunch of websites, and I eventually came across wrecksite.eu, which showed the MV Marshall Islands plus 1979 on his website. And I wasn't sure if this was the right one at first, but then I looked at the map that they provided. So it's not very clear, but it looks like this blue structure is where the wreck occurred. But I thought that looked similar to where Jemo Island was, because it looks like this thing on the bottom left looks like the Likiep atoll. But let's confirm on Google Maps. Now it looks like when we're on Google Maps, here's Jemo Island in the middle. We have the Likiep atoll, and it has this certain orientation. This atoll's facing straight upwards. And there's 2 atolls up here, 2 down here that look like this, and then way in the bottom left, there's a larger one. Let's see if that fits where that picture shows. Okay, that actually looks right. That Likiep atoll has the same orientation. Then there's one facing straight up here, the larger one on the bottom left, and then the 2 above it. So while it doesn't say Jemo Island specifically on this website, it does look like this boat did come ashore on Jemo Island. Let's see what other information this has to see if it can confirm it. Well, the first thing I'm seeing is the dimensions, 54.6 by 10 meters. Let's measure it one more time just to make sure. So from this side all the way to this side, 54 meters. And then if we do the width of it, we have about 10 meters. So that almost perfectly fits with what wrecksite.eu has. It also says it was an American cargo ship. Something to keep in mind was Marshall Islands was under the control of the United States around 1979 when they gained independence around that time. And it looks like the builder of this boat was from Osaka, and looks like it was built around 1976 possibly. But the thing I was interested in is, why did it wreck? Well, it says it was ran aground, wrecked on December 16th, 1979. And it gives a pretty specific date, so I thought that would help me find out more, like maybe a newspaper article or a story about this thing somewhere out there. Unfortunately, when I click on any of these links, it says members only, and I'm not a member of this website, so it won't tell me any more info about it. So we're gonna have to look on Google to see if any newspaper articles had anything. So I looked at the Wikipedia article for list of shipwrecks in 1979, thinking that would help. Going down to December and going to that exact date, December 16th, and it's just a different ship in West Germany. I looked through everything on here, and there's nothing about Jemo Island or really anything about the Marshall Islands. I then thought I found it on the Los Angeles Times, an article from 1988, and it said vanished boat found on island 9 years later. I was like, oh my gosh, that fits perfectly with the time of 1979. And I read about it as a 17-foot Boston whaler. So that is much, much smaller than the one we saw on Jemo Island. But it is an interesting story. It was a one-day fishing trip with 5 people aboard in 1979. And it was discovered on the uninhabited Sibylla Island. And it looks like the wreckage was located 50 yards inland, and there was a shallow grave that was 500 yards inland from the boat. So people had been surviving there for a while. And it says it was February 11th, 1979, so that's also not the right date. And I searched for, I'm telling you, hours for Jemo Island shipwreck, Marshall Islander shipwreck, and I searched every website I could, looked for newspapers, and there was no stories about this thing, at least online, that I could find. But I did find this interesting tidbit from December 12th, 1979, which is 4 days before the wrecksite.eu website showed that the Marshall Islander sank. And interestingly, this article is huge waves ravage a mid-Pacific island. The capital of the Marshall Islands is hit by seas 25 feet high. The capital of the Marshall Islands, Majuro, was devastated this week by huge waves that swept over the east part of this tiny atoll. Looks like 140 homes were known to be destroyed. Even President Carter declared the area a major disaster area at the time. Now, they don't mention anything about a shipwreck or anything at Jemo Island, but I have to imagine that some of these waves actually did cause some shipwrecks at the time, or at least made it hard for boats to traverse this area. This is where Majuro Island is, and if you come up here, this is where Jemo Island is, so not unreasonably far from the area. I found more information on that storm. It looked like it was from Tropical Storm Alice, and it hit on November 27th, 28th, then also on December 4th. There's a lot of pictures of this place, and dang, it did a lot more damage than even I expected after reading that New York Times article. But I could easily see how this could run aground a ship or cause some ships to be blown off course. And going back to this original article, they did say that it was no fault of the captain. So that's my leading hypothesis, that this cargo ship was just coming by the area, and that tropical storm somehow pushed this boat off course and caused it to run aground on this island. I also ended up finding some more information about this ship. I think the IMO number is 7616585, and I searched that on Google, and a bunch of websites like this came up that didn't really give any more info other than it was a cargo ship, and a lot of them said that the vehicle is currently not working, which obviously it's not because it's shipwrecked. But maybe one of you that knows a lot more about ships and how to search for these shipwrecks can find out more info, but that's pretty much all I could find. Anyways, that's pretty much all I got for this video today, so thanks for watching.